Okay, so let's dive right into Covidence. So when you first create your account, it's always good to double check. This should say University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill if you do have, um, if you have registered it correctly with the university's subscription service. From here, you can just do, if anyone has invited you to a review, it will be listed down here, but you can click Start a New Review to obviously start a new review. And then from there, there will be a couple of things that you will need to answer. So the first thing is a question about a Cochrane review. I find that usually people know whether they're doing a Cochrane review by the time they're making their Covidence project, but that's pretty much a review that typically concentrates on just randomized control trials. So if that is a question that you have, whether or not you would want to do a Cochrane review, that's a good example of a question that a librarian could answer at the Health Sciences Library. Okay, so the next step here is we need to name your review. This does need to be a unique name, which can be a little bit difficult. For the purposes of this class, I'm just going to put the date because I know hopefully that name has not been used yet. And then I have found that sometimes this is hard because it needs to be unique for your network. So for example, here we have which account do you want to use. So we can see we have my personal account, which has no reviews left because I don't pay for Covidence, but then we have the University of North Carolina's subscription one, which this has unlimited reviews left. So we do have to choose this UNC account specifically to register to register our review. So because of that, we do have to make sure that this title is unique within the University of North Carolina. So that can be a little bit more difficult to find a unique name. But so just a reminder there. Okay, so then once we have all of this information filled out, and again, we've changed our account to UNC's account, we'll put create a review. And then it will immediately put us into settings. So I'm actually going to go back into one that has already been set up because I think that shows the settings a little bit more. Okay, so back into settings here, we'll see this first tab, review settings. This just has some basic information about our review. So it has our review name if you wanted to change that. Search strategy, you can fill in this information if you want. Date of last search strategy, if you want to have a very comprehensive review on Covidence, but it's not necessary for the purposes of using Covidence. You also have reviewers required to screen, and then reviewers required to screen full text review. So within Covidence, you'll have, your first step will be to review all of your articles that you import as a title and abstract. So you'll review just the title and abstract for those articles. Covidence calls that screen. That's the name that it puts for that process. And then full text review, as the name kind of indicates, that's when you will review the full text of the articles that are in within that phase of review. So these two tabs here are just asking whether you want only one person to review for each of those phases, or if you want two people to review. For a true systematic review, you always have two people reviewing your title and abstract phase as well as your full text review phase. If you're just using Covidence for like a scoping review or a different type of review, or even if you're using it for just like a literature search, you can change this to one, and it really has no impact. Besides you only really need one person to screen each of those articles to decide which article moves next into the process. Something to note here very quickly, so you can, once you start screening, you can change this to one. So you can change, if you had it as two people screening the title and abstract, you can then change this down to one person, but you can't do the reverse. So you couldn't have if you're requiring only one person to screen, you can't then move it up to 2 people if you've already started your review, something that just Covidence does. I think it's mainly because once you're screening, through articles, for example, in the full text or in the title and abstract phase, Covidence will automatically start putting them into the full text review phase, for example, once you can tell it to move along, but it's a lot harder for them to put those articles back to be reviewed. So just something to note here, you can change this to from 2 to 1, but you can't move up from 1 to 2 there. Okay, so once we have all of those, you can save the settings there. And now we'll move on to add or remove reviewers. So this is where you can invite other reviewers to your project. You can just click this button here, invite another reviewer. You'll have to type in their name and their email and then press invite. You can invite other non-UNC reviewers to your review, so they'll be able to access your project just under the scope of the UNC subscription, but they will not be able to create any other projects outside of using the UNC subscription if they're not a UNC member. So just something to keep in mind there. But Covidence is nice in that you can invite external non-UNC collaborators to your projects. Also important to note that since there's so many domains that UNC has in your email, just to make sure that the email that you're inviting that person with is the domain that they use to register their Covidence account. So for example, if you're inviting a student here, just checking with them to make sure that the email that you send it to is either their ad email, their ad email, or their live email, just making sure which email they use to register their Covidence account. Okay, so moving right along, we're going to go to team settings here. And we're going to see a couple of these in action in a little bit. So a couple of these settings in action in a little bit. So if some of this is still not very tangible to you, if you're not getting a very good read on these things, it will make a lot more sense once we dive into the title and abstract screening phase and the full text phase. I think once you are able to see these settings in action, it makes it a lot more easy to digest. Okay, so under team settings here, so we have both you can see here, we have our title and abstract screening section, and then we have a full text screening section and an extraction section. So these are the 3 sections of Covidence that is used in the screening process for your systematic review. Within each of these sections, you can see your progress bar here. You see how many you've done, how many reviews have only had 1 vote, so need that second vote to move it either to the next phase, so to the full, in this case, since we're in title and abstract, to move it to the next phase of full text screening. The amount of ones that have conflicts, so one person said that the article is relevant and should be moved to full text, and then another person said that the article is not relevant. And then we have some no votes here that are left to screen. You can also see the breakdown of how many people reviewed what here. So down here we have your rules that you can do. So some people choose to just have the rules as, everyone can do anything. So basically everyone will be able to screen. And remember, we're in specifically our title and abstract screening. So this refers to everyone can screen and break conflicts within the title and abstract screening section. If you do want to manage rules, so you manage the people that are able to do certain roles, you'll click the manage rules. And then it says all studies must be screened by either. So you can then select with your drop down here. And unfortunately it is only 1 person that Covidence has these rules for, but you can then select the person who you do want to be at least one of those screeners, so the person that decides whether the article is relevant or not. And then you can also select the person who breaks conflicts within this, title and abstract screen. So I'll show you why sometimes you might want to do these rules. Usually I will see when people use these rules, they'll usually use the conflict one, so a little bit more frequently than the screening rule, but they can be helpful, especially if you do want to be very conscientious about who is screening and who is breaking conflicts. And then, so this, again, since we were in our title and abstract, you can do the exact same thing within full text and extraction. So you can go to manage rules, and we're in our full text screening, so you can put which reviewer you want to, which reviewer needs to screen all of the articles under full text, and then which reviewer needs to be the one to break all of the conflicts. And then the same with the extraction, you can say who needs to be the one to extract the data, or who is the one that breaks the tie, in essence, so they call it consensus for the extraction section. Okay, any questions right now about the 3 settings we just mentioned right now? So review settings, add or remove reviewers, or team settings. Okay, so our last 2 settings here, so our criteria and exclusion reasons. I find this setting honestly to be one of the most used sections. And again, we'll see this in action in a little bit more detail in a moment. But this will allow you to set up your inclusion and exclusion criteria. So you can see your inclusion is listed here on the left, and your exclusion is listed on the right here. To add either an inclusion or exclusion, you can, just trying to think of something to put, you can add into the box there. It's pretty simple. It just allows you to write in the box. And then you can press save, and we will be able to see these inclusion and exclusion criteria as we are reviewing all of our references. So we'll see that in action in a little bit more detail, but I do find this useful, especially if somebody who is screening the articles isn't as familiar with the inclusion and exclusion criteria. It's just another quick way to remind people what the inclusion and exclusion criteria are. So we have this for the title and abstract screening phase. So we can see that screening again. And then we can also do manage exclusion reasons for the full text review. So within the full text review phase of Covidence, you can list why you're excluding the article based on certain reasons. So you can add your exclusion reason here and click add, and then we'll see an example of this in a moment, but when you are going through your screening phase within your full text review, you will be able to list one of these reasons as being the reason why you're excluding an article. Last but not least, so manage highlights. This allows you to highlight the article for both inclusion and exclusion words. So within an article, inclusion criteria will highlight as green, and exclusion criteria will highlight as red. If you do want to use this, it can be a useful tool if you're really quickly screening through articles, because it will just prompt you whether or not you're seeing a lot of green or red on the page for whether or not that article might be relevant to your review. Again, we will see an example of this when we dive into the full text review section. Okay, last but not least, we have study tags here. This is another way to organize all of your references within your review. So you can add tags to specific references that are depending on how you want to classify them. For example, I've seen tags listed under background or by chapter sections if you know certain articles you'll need for certain chapters. And I've also seen people use tags if you want to identify certain articles that certain people need to review because they have an expertise in one area or something. So you can also use tags that way too. Tags will basically allow you to filter for that specific tag within your references. So again, I'll show you an example of this so you'll be able to kind of see it in action, but that is where you go to create your study tags. Okay, so with that, that is all of our settings section of Covidence. I know it is quite a bit to review, but it does really help streamline the process for when we jump into each of our different sections of Covidence. So any questions right now about the settings section?